Now to a possible medical breakthrough. Scientists in the UK say they've created synthetic human embryos using stem cells. The structures don't have a beating heart or the beginnings of a brain, but they do include cells that would form the placenta. Scientists say it could aid research in genetic disorders. Critics say it raises serious ethical and legal questions. So joining me now to talk a little bit more about this is healthcare expert Todd Furness. Thank you so much for your time, Todd.
Thanks for having me today.
So, Todd, these embryos aren't exactly human, but there's still a lot we could learn from them.
Well, that's the thinking right now. And just to be clear, I think we need to kind of set the table for the conversation in terms of stating where we are in this process, if that's okay. First, it's a claim that was made by Professor yt5s, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that name, at a plenary session at the International Society of Stem Cell Research. It has not been published in a peer-reviewed journal yet. So that doesn't mean that there's no reason to believe it hadn't happened. It just means that it's early in the process and we have much to learn yet from this published study when it becomes published. But there are a lot of implications here, and it's going to be we have a lot to unpack.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack. So they don't have a heartbeat or the beginnings of a brain. Is there an argument to be made that they aren't alive and therefore the ethical questions, they just don't apply here?
Well, this is a very rich conversation, for a rich topic of conversation, I should say. The legal limit for how long these tissues can evolve is 14 days. So they're not permitted to go beyond that. That means that it doesn't have a heartbeat yet, and it doesn't have a brain. It doesn't have cognitive capability or even impulses yet. So it's difficult to determine that it's necessarily quote unquote alive. And I think theologians and many would have an argument as to whether or not it is alive. But it still raises a tremendous number of moral, ethical, legal, and countless other issues that we kind of have to categorize in order to even try and unpack individually.
Yeah, it's crazy, but really just awesome where science is going. Does this mean that we are another step closer to human cloning?
Well, I think that's a good idea. I mean, a good transition. And I think the word "awesome" is interesting. An interesting choice of words in that it is awe-inspiring, meaning it's amazing to think about the ability to create human life ultimately, if that's a possibility. The question is, what are we going to use this for? And the argument that researchers are making is that we could use this to understand things like miscarriages and developmental abnormalities and other medical issues that we would learn how to either prevent or avoid in the future. I think there's a whole other body of work which includes things like genetic editing, which this kind of runs in parallel with. And then you have all sorts of questions that the neuroscientists and neuroethicists and the bioethicists are going to want to tap into. So there's a lot to work on here before we get to a place where we can actually clone a human being.
Yeah, but it definitely sounds like, Todd, thank you for that. It sounds like we definitely have a lot of legal implications to get through first before that's ever going to happen.
Yes, indeed. And I think that one of the things that this is going to sound a little strange, perhaps, but for example, whose embryo is this? If it's born in a quote unquote petri dish, for lack of a better term, whose embryo is it? Is it the states? Is it the research labs? Is it the people who donated the stem cells themselves? And then what happens if we do get past that 14-day period? At what point does it move from a living thing like a plant or an animal that's not human into the developmental of moral status and human rights? That's a whole nother set of questions. So the way that the law in each individual country, and to be clear, the race is on. This research is being done in China, it's being done in Israel, it's being done in the United States, it's being done in England, and more broadly in the UK. So I think there are lots of questions that need to be answered or at least developed before we can get to any of these rational conclusions.
Todd Furness, fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.